Gerard Lyons, Chief Economist at NatWealth Investments, who was Chief Economic Advisor to Boris Johnson when he was the Mayor of London. And we'll be hearing in a second too from Nairi Woods, Professor of Global Economic Governance at Oxford University. Now, Gerard Lyons, you were one of those who argued in favour of leave, and Lord O'Neill predicts in the rest of the interview you'll be like a cat that got the cream. Not you personally, but all people who've argued for leave. You'll be saying, I told you so. But he does say it's the global economy that has made the difference.
Well, the global economy has made a clear difference. Look, during the referendum campaign and immediately after, I described leaving the European Union as an economic shock. I said, despite that shock, the performance of the economy, I called it a Nike swoosh in the sense in the near term, because of uncertainty, it might hold investment back. But
in other words,
no
there'd be a
doubt
dip followed by a rise.
Yeah, and the economy would still grow steadily, but the further ahead one projects, the better the outlook would be, because Brexit's good news for the economy. Now, the key thing is for the UK to position itself globally. The European Union is a declining share of the world economy. The European Union is a declining share of our exports. And the UK is a service sector economy, and we know that in the single market, services do not work properly. Now, the key thing over the last year has been that the world economy has done really well. Indeed, it started to gather momentum towards the end of 2016. Global trade is now picking up, investment is picking up. But a key factor is whichever economy one looks at, the outcome depends upon the interaction between fundamentals, policy and confidence. The fundamentals for the world economy in the short term are improving. Longer term, I think they're very good. The key issues over next year will be what happens to policy and to confidence. Because in terms of policy, not just globally, but Britain, for the last 7-8 years post-global financial crisis, we've been overly dependent on cheap money. And now the key challenge is that central bankers need to tighten policy in the gradual and in a predictable way that doesn't undermine the financial markets or the recovery.
But in a sense, it seems to me you're acknowledging, and maybe you say you'd always said it, that it is those factors, cheap money in particular, but also what's happening in China, the growth in the Eurozone, the growth in Trump's America, partly due, it's argued, to deregulation.
I'm not
and
saying that
corporate
that's
tax
the
cuts.
only factor, that's the recovery.
But it's
Look,
not Brexit in a way isn't yet doing anything either way very much.
Look, what we've always known is that the UK has been one of the most open and flexible and adaptable economies. That's why we should have been optimistic about the UK economy, even though the economy was going to be hit by shock if we voted to leave. And I think it would be important to stress that the Remain side, if we can call it that, was predicting financial Armageddon and an economic collapse. Now, the longer ahead we project, then the more important is that we all pull together. And if confidence starts to kick in, then I think we can become more optimistic. But coming back to your question, Nick, it's not just global. I think it's global factors have helped.
Okay,
there's no
just
doubt about that.
Just on policy, you mentioned the policy of central banks, in particular for so-called cheap money. Surely the crucial policy unknown at the moment is what deal we will get on Brexit, what will be offered, what we'll ask for, and what can actually be achieved in negotiations. And that could be quite benign, or it could, do you accept this, it could be pretty disastrous.
Well, I don't think it's going to be economically disastrous, but it does depend in terms of the outlook partly on how the deal is worked out.
When you talked about this Nike tick, in other words, a slowdown in the economy followed by an uptick, just to be clear what we're referring to, if there was no deal or a bad deal, does that tick operate? In other words, do you think we could indeed slow down, albeit that you'd be an optimist in the medium to long term?
I think we should be very positive about where we are from here. Look, we are where we are. I do think it's going to be a successful deal, but clearly there will be some impact from that. But just coming back on what's been said, look, the UK economy is in a very strong position because of its adaptability, flexibility. But lots of parts of the economy really do need to fundamentally change. We need more investment, more innovation at home. And 40 years of being in the EU has not allowed us to address those industrial strategy regional problems. But globally, there are several much smaller economies than the UK with far less commercial and diplomatic influence who have signed a range of free trade agreements really dwarfing the size of those struck by the European Union. The EU has not been good at doing trade deals. The UK service sector always figures low down on the list. We clearly need to have a good relationship with the EU. There's no doubt about that.
Okay, let me bring Professor
We need
Woods
to
back in.
position ourselves globally, but also we need to get the domestic economy right, and we will have more room for manoeuvre to do that, in my opinion, outside the EU, provided we start to invest more.